As a former reality TV star turned US president once said,
"You're fired! Get out of here! You're fired!"
What's up, history homies? We've all had that job where your boss was clueless, your coworkers were useless, and by the end of the day, you were just praying to get fired so you could finally go home. Or maybe you just sucked at your job. Look, let's be honest. The reality is getting fired is a part of life. But if you were a Confederate general, getting fired by Jefferson Davis didn't just mean you got a bad performance review. No. It meant the difference between leading an army or vanishing into historical obscurity. And that's what this video is about. Confederate generals who got canned. Gone, bye, see you later. Whether it was political favoritism, battlefield blunders, or massive egos, somebody was always losing their job. So in this video, we're going to take a look at 9 Confederate generals who found themselves in the unemployment line. And if that sounds like your kind of workplace drama, buckle up, because Jefferson Davis is about to hand out some pink slips. First up is Theophilus Holmes. This dude was nearly 60 years old when the war broke out. He got promoted quickly, commanded parts of North Carolina, and even helped defend Richmond during the Peninsula Campaign. But that's where the wheels started to fall off. During the 7 Days Battle, Holmes got wrecked at Malvern Hill. Robert E. Lee was like, "Come on, man," and Davis moved him out west away from the action. Then, Holmes got stuck leading the Trans-Mississippi Department, which was one of the hardest jobs during the American Civil War. When Vicksburg came under siege, Holmes refused to send help, arguing that his men were too weak to make it. I mean, he wasn't wrong, but it also was not a good look. In early 1863, Jefferson Davis finally had enough. Holmes was removed again from his command after the disastrous attack on Helena on July 4th, the same day that Vicksburg fell. His own men, they didn't respect him. They actually called him Granny Holmes. Not exactly a flattering nickname. Sick, exhausted, fed up, and probably just embarrassed, Holmes ended up resigning the following year. He was just an old man fighting in a young man's war, and that got him canned. Next up is John Bell Hood. This guy was like your typical movie general. Flashy bravado, non-stop action, and absolutely zero patience for nuance. He kind of reminds me of Ben Stiller in Tropic Thunder. Tug Speedman, baby. Hood made his name leading the Texas Brigade in the Peninsula Campaign. At Gaines' Mill, he charged hard, and I mean charged hard. He broke the line, but watched his brigade pay the price. I'm talking around 400 casualties. Ouch. But Jefferson Davis eventually promoted him and gave him the worst possible job. Replaced Joseph E. Johnston outside of Atlanta on July 18, 1864. At 33, he was the youngest army commander on either side. And this guy was about to go up against William motherfucking Sherman. And Hood tried to out Sherman. I mean, is that even possible? No, it wasn't. And in the Franklin-Nashville campaign in late 1864, Hood gambled everything. At Franklin, he ordered mass attacks across open ground and watched his best officers and thousands of men die in one of the war's bloodiest disasters. And at Nashville, Union General George Thomas crushed whatever was left. The Army of Tennessee was essentially destroyed. Davis had enough. He told him to get the hell out of here, and John Bell Hood was finished.
You're fired!
And next up, if there was ever a Confederate general who could make being fired look like an art form, it was Gideon Pillow. This guy was arrogant. He strutted into the Confederacy convinced he was a military genius because he once technically served with Zachary Taylor in Mexico. Big whoop. Unfortunately, Pillow's confidence wasn't matched by his competence. To start things off, he invaded neutral Kentucky without permission and single-handedly pushed the state towards the Union. And I'm sure that thrilled Jefferson Davis. Then came Fort Donelson in 1862. Pillow helped plan a surprise breakout that actually worked, but then he decided to stop mid-victory to resupply before escaping. The Union forces, led by none other than Ulysses S. Grant, were like, yeah, sure, we'll take that. And when the Confederates finally decided to surrender, Pillow pulled a classic move. He handed command to someone else and escaped across the river in a rowboat to save his own skin like a little punk. Jefferson Davis was pissed and suspended him for this move, but he was eventually reinstated in late 1862. Gideon Pillow, always failing upward. Now, Pillow was a tough act to follow, but Earl Van Dorn is certainly up to the task. This guy entered the war with charm, ambition, and delusions of grandeur. He dreamed of glory, and early on, he actually showed flashes of brilliance. Jefferson Davis promoted him to Major General and sent him west to command the Trans-Mississippi District, and I bet he was thrilled. But this assignment didn't exactly work in his favor. At Pea Ridge in 1862, Van Dorn's army outnumbered the Union, but poor planning, lost supplies, and bad timing turned a sure win into an embarrassing defeat. Then came Corinth, where he attacked a fortified Union position head-on and got hammered. He was eventually hauled before a court of inquiry, and he was actually acquitted, but he was stripped of his army command. Unfortunately for Van Dorn, he was shot dead in 1863 by a jealous husband. Next up, we have Daniel H. Hill. When war broke out, he didn't hesitate. A professor turned firefighter, he took command of the 1st North Carolina and actually won one of the Confederacy's first victories, Big Bethel, in June of 1861. Overnight, Hill went from math teacher to military hero. By 1862, he was a major general under Lee. He was brave and capable, but very hard to command. Hill questioned orders, insulted superiors, and never learned the art of flattery. After Stonewall Jackson's death, Lee reorganized the army and didn't give Hill a corps. Burn! Instead, he was sent away to recruit and his pride never recovered. He was eventually transferred out west in 1863, becoming a corps commander under Braxton Bragg in the Army of Tennessee. And this is where shit hit the fan. At Chickamauga, he blasted Bragg for failing to pursue the Union. But Jefferson Davis, he actually sided with Bragg. Hill was stripped of his command, his promotion never confirmed, and he vanished from the high command for the rest of the war. Now we're getting to the big guns. When the war began, P.G.T. Beauregard looked like the perfect Confederate. The little Frenchman was brilliant and charismatic. In early 1861, Jefferson Davis sent him to Charleston to handle the crisis at Fort Sumter. And on April 12th, Beauregard gave the order that started the Civil War. A few months later at Bull Run, his army shocked the Union and set the tone. But behind the scenes, Davis already started to distrust him. Apparently, Beauregard was leaking reports to the press, criticizing the president and demanding glory in print. And when Davis read Beauregard's self-congratulatory report on Bull Run in the newspapers, he was pissed. Davis was already looking for ways to move him out. Fast forward to 1862, Beauregard ended up replacing Albert Sidney Johnston at Shiloh. During this battle, instead of pressing the attack, he halted for the night, and by morning, Grant counterattacked. The South called it a lost victory, but Davis, he called it incompetence. And when Beauregard left his army on medical leave without permission, Davis finally had his excuse. P.G.T. Beauregard was relieved of command and replaced by his old rival, Braxton Bragg.
You're fired!
And this brings me to the man himself, Braxton Bragg. If there was ever one Confederate general who could pick a fight with an empty room, it was Bragg. Before the war, he was a disciplined, by-the-book officer with a mean unibrow. However, even Jefferson Davis, who actually liked him, admitted Bragg was brilliant, but nearly impossible to like. I mean, we've all had that coworker, but Bragg still proved himself. He fought hard enough to earn promotion to full general, one of the only 7 in the entire Confederacy. So far, so good, but then came Kentucky. At Perryville, he declared victory while retreating, and after Stone's River, his own generals wanted him gone. They despised his temper, his arrogance, and his habit of blaming everybody else. Still, Jefferson Davis, loyal to a fault, kept him in command. But after Chattanooga, when the army literally broke and ran, Bragg offered to resign. This time, Davis accepted. Not exactly fired, but Bragg knew what was coming. Next up, we have John C. Pemberton. Born in Pennsylvania and trained at West Point, he resigned from the U.S. Army in 1861, ignoring pleas of family and his old boss, Winfield Scott. Early in the war, he was promoted fast. A brigadier general by June, a major general by January, and soon in command of Charleston's defenses. But his blunt manner and Yankee birth made him deeply unpopular. After suggesting that he'd rather abandon the city than lose his army, the governors of South Carolina and Georgia begged Jefferson Davis to remove him. Davis obliged, shipping Pemberton out west to defend Vicksburg, Mississippi. Bad trade. Facing Ulysses S. Grant, Pemberton had about 30,000 exhausted men against 70,000 seasoned Union troops. He was outnumbered AF. And after defeats at Champion Hill and Big Black River, he retreated into Vicksburg's fortifications. Davis told him to hold at all costs. Joseph E. Johnston told him to evacuate. And Pemberton? He did neither. For 6 brutal weeks, his army and the city starved under Grant's siege. And finally, on July 4th, 1863, he surrendered Vicksburg and over 29,000 men. It was the same day the Confederates lost Gettysburg. Talk about a rough week. Blamed for losing the Mississippi, Pemberton was quietly demoted to lieutenant colonel of artillery, an embarrassing fall for a man who'd once commanded an entire army. And finally, we have Joseph E. Johnston, the Confederacy's comeback kid. fired for being too cautious, and then brought back when things couldn't get worse. A veteran of the Mexican-American War and one of the South's highest-ranking officers, Johnston started strong. He won praise at Bull Run and built solid defenses wherever he went. But his cautious style, what his critics called retreating in slow motion, drove Jefferson Davis insane. The two men couldn't stand each other. By 1864, Johnston was in charge of defending Georgia against Sherman's march towards Atlanta. His strategy was sound: trade space for time, wear the Union down, and strike when the conditions favored him. But to Davis, every step back looked like cowardice. And after months of withdrawals and no decisive battles, Davis had enough. On July 17, 1864, he fired Johnston and replaced him with the far more aggressive and reckless John Bell Hood. And that went about as well as you could expect. If you've made it this far into the video, I just want to say thank you. You're a true history homie. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think about all these Confederate generals getting fired? Was Jefferson Davis right to keep cycling through his commanders, or did his constant interference make things worse for the South? And do you think that the Confederacy's biggest enemy was the Union Army, or maybe its own leadership? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss out on my future videos, trivia, and bracket challenges. Thanks again for watching. Now get out of here.